Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you exactly how you can build an invoice automation workflow. Now this is a workflow that I've used with my AI automation agency Samora and have successfully sold this to multiple clients who have all come back and said that it saved them a great deal of time because they were manually processing these invoices before. So I'm going to show you guys a demo of the workflow in action. I'm going to walk you through the entire workflow, and I'm even going to leave the JSON of the workflow down in the description so you guys can download the workflow, get it up in your n8n, tweak it however you like and sell it for yourselves. So to start with, I'm going to show you guys a quick demo of the workflow in action, and then I'll walk you through the workflow node by node so you can build this yourselves and sell this automation to businesses. So as you can see here, we're creating an example invoice using Claude to actually put into our automation workflow to test it. Right, so Claude's now giving me this invoice example, which I'm going to go ahead and download, and I'm simply going to drop it in a Google Drive called incoming invoices. Okay. Right, so I've just put that into the Google Drive, and now I'm very simply going to execute the workflow, and this should extract all that information and log it in a Google Sheet for me. So as you can see, it's been marked as successful. We come to the Google Sheet, right? So you can see here, the key information from the invoice has been logged in this row 10, and we come here to process invoices, and you can see that PDF invoice is now sitting in that drive, okay? And you can check here that all the details match up. You see the figure, the invoice number, that's all matching up here. Now to explain the automation for you guys, we have a traffic light system set up. So if it's a known supplier and it's less than 2K, this will be flagged as green. If it's an unknown supplier and less than 2K, or it's a known supplier and it's more than 2K, this will be logged as amber. And if it's an unknown supplier and more than 2K, this will be logged as red. And this is just an example of a traffic light system you can use. But obviously, if you're selling this automation to businesses, you can understand exactly what they want as their flags and change these nodes around based on what their preferences are. But this is just an example to show you guys how it works. Now let's go through the workflow so you guys can build this yourselves. So you're going to start with a Google Drive node, and you're going to set up your Google Drive credentials. You're going to set the poll time mode to every minute and the trigger to changes inside a specific folder, and you're going to create a folder called incoming invoices for this node to watch. So when you drop that file into that drive and you run the workflow, it will check which file has been dropped in most recently, and it will use that file to execute the workflow with. So the next node is a download invoice PDF node. So very simply, you're going to connect to your Drive account again, and you're going to download the file which has just been uploaded to that Google Drive. So the way to set that up, you're going to go to the input section, you're going to scroll down till you see ID, and you're just going to drag that into this section here, and you're going to set the file to by ID, okay? And then it knows exactly which file to use for the workflow. And you can see the output is that new file that we just uploaded. And then we go to the next node. This is a simple data extraction node. So as you can see, the operation is extract from PDF. So in the invoice PDF node, this output file in field section here, invoice PDF, has to match with the input binary field here, okay? And that's the important thing for this node. You're going to set this to binary, and then you can see here, it's actually extracted all of the information as text here. Now we go to our AI agent node. Now for this node, we're going to use an extract invoice info node. The text is going to just come from here, the text that we extracted in the previous node. So this is the system prompt we've used for the AI agent. We've said it's an expert invoice data extraction system, extract the relevant information and be precise, etc. So this agent essentially acts as an extraction agent. So it takes this text, it outputs this as clean JSON output where the text has now got values, okay? And how have we done this? Well, this code snippet here that I used AI to generate for me essentially handles that task. Remember guys, I've put this entire workflow in the description so you don't have to worry about all this code bit here. you'll get that yourselves. So now we've got all the information from the invoice extracted cleanly, and each piece of information from the data has a value corresponding to what that information is. And now we go to the read known suppliers sheet. So this is another tab in the original invoice tracker sheet called known suppliers. And you can see here, this is a list of all the known suppliers that the company has. So again, you'll tailor this to the company when it's actually being used. But this is just an example of some of the known suppliers that I put in to test my workflow. Essentially, this Google Sheet node connects to that known suppliers sheet from the invoice tracker document. And you're going to filter this using the vendor name column, and the value is the vendor name output from the JSON. So you can see that here, okay? And you're going to set the combined filters to AND. Okay, so what this does is it will output if it's a known supplier, and as you can see here, it will output an empty item because nothing's returned because it's not a known supplier. And the key here is to set this to always output data. So if it's not a known supplier, the workflow will continue, but it just won't output anything. So that's very important for the if node here, so it can see if it's a known supplier or not. So then when we go to the if node here, you can see JSON default payment terms is red. And that's because in the Google Sheet, there's a default payment terms. So if it's a known supplier, it will have a number here corresponding to that known supplier. But because this is not a known supplier, this is actually red because it doesn't exist. So you set this to exists, and then you can see here, this is false because it's not a known supplier, because it doesn't recognize the default payment terms from the Google Sheet. And because it's false, it will come down here to unknown supplier, and that will get logged into the Google Sheet. And then we go to the next if node here, and it says extract invoice info, which is here, JSON output total due. So we're going to scroll down and we see the total due here. Now this number is more than 2,000. So you can see here it's 2,424, so it's greater than 2,000. So this if statement essentially says if it's less than 2,000 and more than 0. So that means if it's less than 2,000, it will be labeled as true. And if it's not less than 2,000, it will be more than 2,000, so it's labeled false. So then in the workflow, we can see the false leads to more than 2K. So because it's not less than 2,000, it has to be more than 2K, and it's labeled false. And again, this is then tracked in the Google Sheet. You can see that here. And essentially this code node takes in the data from these if statements and uses the traffic light system to determine if it's red, green, or amber, okay? Now again, I'm not going to go into the details of this code node. It will be in the description, so you can just copy this in. But this just essentially organizes the traffic light system for you by taking in the details of if it's less than or more than 2K, and if it's an unknown or known supplier. So it takes in that data and then will output a color based upon that information. And then we come here to the log to invoice tracker, connect to your Google Sheet again. You're going to set the operation to append row here. You're going to select the sheet in that document, which is invoice tracker. And then these are all the different columns. You're going to set the date processed to now. You're going to select the vendor. And then a lot of this information is just taken from the extracted information node over here. So the vendor name here, the invoice number will come from here, and so on. Invoice date, due date, it's all in that one node, which comes from our AI agent over here, okay? Now the data that's not part of the AI agent node is going to be from the previous code node that determined the traffic light system. So you can see JSON.trafficlight here, you can see it's red, and that's because it's more than 2,000 and it's an unknown supplier. And then also the status as well, which says manual review required. And that's simply because it's labeled as red. So that means that there's a review required. And then we also see the link to the PDF down at the bottom here. And then we come here to the move to process node. So this is another Google Drive node. Essentially what it does is you select the resource, which is a file, and you select the operation as move. And you're going to use the same ID here. So as you can see, it starts with watch incoming invoices. So we go to that node, which is the first node. And then it says item JSON ID, and you can see the ID here, okay? So that matches up there. And then you select the parent drive and the parent folder. So that's the processed invoices folder. So essentially it takes the file from the original Google Drive from incoming invoices, and it will take that file by using the ID and put it here in the processed invoices, which is a different folder in my Google Drive. And then finally, you have the mark success node, which essentially just tells you that the workflow has been completed successfully and it has a processed, and then you just put now to ISO, which is essentially the time and date right now. So yeah guys, that's the workflow in a nutshell. Again, I'll put the JSON in the description so you guys can get this up in your n8n and sort of tweak it how you like, see how it works for yourselves, test it out. And you can also sell this automation to businesses. It's a very useful automation, especially to businesses that receive many invoices a day and are manually logging these. Say for example, you have a business that's interested in your automation, you can add more nodes to hook it up, to hook the automation up to their API that they use. So most businesses will have an accounting software that they use, for example, QuickBooks, etc. So you can add nodes at the end of the workflow that hook up to the API of the accounting software that they use. So you can automate their entire invoice process workflow in n8n. But yeah, I hope this has helped. I hope you guys were able to follow along and see how the automation worked, and leave in the comment section below what you'd want to see next. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.